The stillness of death greeted Elena as her flashlight revealed Luna's lifeless body, the mother bobcat's 4 newborn kittens still nestled against her cold fur. A tiny, desperate mewl pierced the silence of the den, shattering everything the wildlife biologist thought she knew about survival, sacrifice, and the impossible choice now before her. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The wilderness of northern Arizona holds countless secrets within its rugged terrain. Among its rocky outcrops and pine-studded slopes, a drama of life and death plays out daily, witnessed only by the silent trees and whispering winds. Here in the shadow of the San Francisco peaks, a female bobcat known to local researchers as Luna was about to change everything they thought they knew about her species. Luna moved silently through the underbrush, her spotted coat blending perfectly with the dappled sunlight filtering through the ponderosa pines. At 3 years old, she was in her prime, a skilled hunter with a territory spanning nearly 5 square miles of pristine wilderness. But today, she wasn't hunting. Her movements were slower, more deliberate, her swollen belly making her usually graceful stride somewhat awkward. Wildlife biologist Dr. Elena Cortez had been tracking Luna for nearly 2 years as part of a comprehensive study on bobcat populations in northern Arizona. The small GPS collar around Luna's neck had provided invaluable data about her movements, hunting patterns, and territory boundaries. But what Elena was about to witness would transcend mere scientific observation and challenge everything she thought she knew about these elusive predators. "Anything on the tracker?" asked Mike Reynolds, Elena's research assistant, as he navigated their weathered Jeep along the narrow Forest Service road. The vehicle bounced over the uneven terrain, equipment rattling in the back. Elena studied the handheld receiver, her brow furrowed in concentration. "She's been in the same location for nearly 18 hours now. That's unusual for her." "Maybe she's made a kill," Mike suggested, slowing the Jeep as they approached a clearing. Elena shook her head, her dark ponytail swinging with the movement. "No, this is different. Based on her behavior patterns over the last few weeks, I think she might be preparing to give birth." The possibility sent a thrill of excitement through Elena. Documenting a bobcat birth in the wild would be an incredible opportunity. Few researchers had ever been privileged to observe such an intimate moment in these notoriously secretive animals' lives. They parked the Jeep at the end of the service road and continued on foot, following the signal from Luna's collar. The April morning was cool, but promised warmth later as the sun climbed higher in the cloudless blue sky. Elena moved with practiced quiet, her boots barely making a sound on the needle-covered forest floor. Mike followed closely, carrying the camera equipment. The signal led them to a rocky outcropping nestled against a steep hillside. Elena raised her hand, signaling Mike to stop. "She's close," she whispered, pointing to a small opening between 2 large boulders. "I think she's in there." Setting up their observation post at a respectful distance, Elena and Mike prepared for a long wait. Wildlife observation required infinite patience, a quality Elena had in abundance. Through her high-powered spotting scope, she could just make out the entrance to what appeared to be a small den Luna had created. Hours passed with no movement. The sun climbed higher, warming the rocks and bringing out the scent of pine and dry earth. Insects buzzed lazily in the heat of the day. Mike dozed off briefly while Elena remained vigilant, her eyes never leaving the den entrance. Just as the afternoon light began to soften into evening, there was movement at the den entrance. Luna emerged cautiously, her amber eyes scanning her surroundings with predatory intensity. Elena held her breath, her hand finding Mike's arm and squeezing gently to wake him. "She's out," Elena whispered, excitement making her voice tremble slightly. "And look, she's definitely given birth." Luna's belly, once swollen with pregnancy, now appeared notably smaller. The bobcat stretched, her muscles rippling beneath her spotted coat, then disappeared back into the den. "How many kittens do you think she has?" Mike asked, adjusting the video camera on its tripod. "Typically 2 to 3, Elena replied, "but we won't know for sure until we can get a clear view." Their answer came sooner than expected. Within minutes, Luna reappeared, but this time she wasn't alone. Dangling from her mouth was a tiny kitten, its eyes still tightly closed, ears flattened against its spotted head. With gentle precision, Luna carried the kitten to a sunny spot near the den entrance and began to groom it. "She's moving them," Elena said, her voice hushed with awe. "This is incredible." Over the next 30 minutes, Luna made 3 more trips into the den, each time emerging with another kitten. 4 in total, an unusually large litter for a bobcat. Each tiny bundle was placed carefully in the warm patch of sunlight while Luna meticulously groomed them. 4 kittens, Mike whispered, his camera capturing every precious moment. "That's exceptional, isn't it?" Elena nodded, not taking her eyes off the scene. "Very, and they all look healthy from what I can tell." She made quick notes in her field journal, recording the time, behavior, and her initial observations of the kitten's condition. The peaceful family scene continued as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the forest floor. Luna curled protectively around her 4 kittens, allowing them to nurse while she remained vigilant, her ears constantly swiveling to catch any sound that might signal danger. As darkness fell, Elena reluctantly packed up their observation equipment. They would return at first light, hoping to continue documenting this remarkable family. The data they were collecting would provide unprecedented insights into bobcat maternal behavior and kitten development. "We should name them," Mike suggested as they made their way back to the Jeep, flashlights illuminating the path ahead. Elena smiled in the darkness. "Let's see if they all survive first," she said, her tone gentle but realistic. "Infant mortality is high among wildcats. 4 is a lot for Luna to manage on her own." The next morning dawned clear and cool. Elena and Mike were at their observation post before sunrise, eager to check on Luna and her kittens. But as the first rays of sunlight illuminated the den entrance, an uneasy feeling settled in Elena's stomach. There was no sign of movement. "Maybe they're still sleeping," Mike offered, noticing Elena's concerned expression. "Maybe," she agreed, but something felt wrong. Luna was typically active in the early morning hours, often leaving her den to hunt before the day grew too warm. By mid-morning, Elena's concern had deepened into worry. Still no sign of Luna or her kittens. The tracking signal showed that Luna's collar was still in the vicinity of the den, but without visual confirmation, Elena couldn't determine if the bobcat was inside or if something had happened to her. "I think we need to check," she finally said, her scientific caution warring with her concern for the animals she'd been studying so closely. "Are you sure?" Mike asked, knowing how seriously Elena took the principle of minimal interference with wild animals. "What if she's just moved them to another location within the den?" Elena chewed her lip, considering. "The signal hasn't moved significantly. If she were alive and moving around in there, we'd see more variation." She made her decision. "We'll approach carefully. If we hear any sounds indicating she's in there, we'll back off immediately." They approached the den with extreme caution, moving slowly and making enough noise to alert Luna to their presence without startling her. The entrance to the den yawned dark and silent before them. Elena knelt and shined her flashlight into the opening, her heart pounding. What the beam revealed made her gasp. Luna lay motionless on her side, her 4 kittens still nestled against her body. The bobcat's eyes were closed, her magnificent coat dulled in death. "She's gone," Elena whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Despite her scientific training, the loss struck her deeply. Some kind of postpartum complication, maybe. "And the kittens?" Mike asked, kneeling beside her. As if in answer to his question, a tiny sound emerged from the den, the weak mewling of a kitten. Then another joined it. "They're alive," Elena exclaimed, shining her light more directly on the tiny creatures. "At least some of them." The decision that faced them now was one that would challenge Elena's professional ethics and personal convictions. Interference with wildlife was something she had always approached with extreme caution. Nature had its own way, its own balance. But these kittens, just hours old, still blind and helpless, faced certain death without their mother. "We can't just leave them," Mike said, voicing what Elena was already thinking. "No," she agreed, her mind racing through protocols and possibilities. "But taking them means committing to their care until they can be released. That's months of round-the-clock attention." Mike met her gaze steadily. "If anyone can do it, you can." With gentle hands, Elena reached into the den, her heart breaking for the tiny orphans. She carefully extracted each kitten, placing them in a small portable incubator Mike had retrieved from their research equipment. The kittens' eyes remained sealed shut, their tiny bodies no larger than the palm of her hand, spotted fur still damp and matted in places. "This one's not moving," Mike said grimly, holding the smallest of the four. Its tiny chest showed no signs of the rapid breathing visible in its siblings. Elena took the motionless kitten, cradling it in her warm hands. With the delicate touch of someone who had rehabilitated wildlife for years, she gently massaged its chest with her fingertip, willing life back into the tiny creature. "Come on, little one," she whispered. "Don't give up." Just as she was about to admit defeat, the kitten gave a weak, barely perceptible twitch. Then another. And finally, the miracle she'd been hoping for, a tiny, gasping breath, followed by another. "There you go," Elena said, relief washing over her. She placed the revived kitten with its siblings in the incubator. "They need warmth and they need food soon. Let's get them back to the research station." The drive back was tense, with Elena constantly checking the kittens while Mike navigated the bumpy forest roads with extra care. The Northern Arizona Wildlife Research Station was a modest facility nestled at the edge of the national forest, a converted ranch house with several outbuildings that served as laboratories, recovery spaces for injured wildlife, and housing for the small staff of researchers and volunteers. As they pulled up to the main building, Dr. Marcus Rivera, the station's veterinarian, was already waiting, alerted by Elena's urgent call from the road. 4 neonatal bobcat kittens, Elena reported as Marcus helped carry the incubator inside. Mother died of unknown causes, possibly postpartum complications. They can't be more than 24 hours old. Marcus, a stocky man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and the gentle hands of an experienced wildlife vet, immediately went into professional mode. "Let's get them under the heat lamp and assessed. Sophia," he called to his veterinary assistant. "We need kitten milk replacer mixed stat, the formula for wildcats, not domestic." The next hour was a flurry of activity as each kitten was weighed, examined, and stabilized. 3 males and 1 female, all severely dehydrated but otherwise showing no obvious health problems. The smallest, the one Elena had revived, was concerning, weighing significantly less than his siblings. "He's the runt," Marcus confirmed, his experienced fingers gently examining the tiny creature. "Probably would have struggled even with Luna alive. These little guys typically have a high mortality rate in the first week, even under ideal circumstances." Elena felt a fierce determination take hold of her. "But they have a chance, right?" Marcus looked at her over his reading glasses, his expression softening. "Yes, they have a chance. But you understand what you're signing up for? These kittens will need feeding every 2 hours around the clock for weeks. They'll need stimulation to eliminate, temperature monitoring, eventual weaning to solid food, and then the whole process of preparing them for release without habituating them to humans. He paused. It's a massive undertaking, Elena. Are you sure the research station can commit to this? Elena didn't hesitate. We have to try, Marcus. Luna was one of our most important study subjects. Her genetics are valuable to the local population, and these kittens represent an unusual opportunity to observe bobcat development from day one. Marcus nodded, recognizing both the scientific argument and the determination in Elena's eyes. I'll help however I can, but the primary care will fall to you and your team. I understand. We'll make it work. That night began what would become the most challenging and rewarding project of Elena's career. She set up a makeshift nursery in her small cabin on the research station grounds, converting her study into a neonatal care unit with heating pads, monitoring equipment, and everything needed for round-the-clock kitten care. Mike and 2 graduate student volunteers, Jesse and Thomas, agreed to rotate shifts with Elena, ensuring the kittens were never left alone. Each feeding was a delicate process, using small syringes to slowly drip the specially formulated milk replacer into their tiny mouths, then gently stimulating each kitten to urinate and defecate, just as their mother would have done with her rough tongue. Have you thought about names? Jesse asked on the 3rd night, as she and Elena sat cross-legged on the floor beside the incubator during the 2 a.m. feeding. Elena smiled tiredly, dark circles under her eyes testament to her disrupted sleep schedule. I was thinking we could name them after mountains in the San Francisco range. The female is Fremont, after Fremont Peak. She pointed to each male in turn. Humphreys, Agassiz, and Doyle. Doyle for the little one? Jesse asked, gently syringe feeding the runt who still struggled more than his siblings. Elena nodded. Doyle Peak is the smallest of the 4 main peaks, but still mighty. Day by day, the kittens grew stronger. Their weights increased steadily, except for Doyle, who gained more slowly but still showed improvement. Their eyes remained closed, their world one of darkness, touch, and smell, their tiny paws kneading instinctively during feedings as they would have against their mother's belly. At 2 weeks, the first milestone arrived. Fremont's eyes began to open, revealing a sliver of blue-gray that would eventually turn to the amber typical of adult bobcats. Her brothers followed suit over the next few days, with little Doyle the last to greet the visual world. They're hitting all their developmental markers, Elena reported during a conference call with her research supervisor at Northern Arizona University. Weights are within normal parameters for captive-raised kittens, except for the runt, who remains about 15% below average, but his activity level is good, and he's responsive. What Elena didn't mention was how attached she was becoming to these 4 little survivors. Despite her best efforts to maintain scientific detachment, there was something about their fierce will to live that touched her deeply. Doyle, especially, with his determined struggles and eventual triumphs, had captured her heart in a way no study subject ever had before. As the kittens approached their 4th week, their personalities began to emerge distinctly. Humphreys was the bold one, always first to investigate new objects placed in their growing enclosure. Agassiz was more methodical, watching his brother's adventures before deciding whether to join. Fremont, the only female, showed remarkable climbing abilities, scaling the mesh sides of their enclosure before her brothers had even attempted it. And Doyle, still the smallest, compensated with cunning, finding the most efficient routes to food and warmth, conserving his energy while still keeping up with his more robust siblings. It was during their 5th week that something extraordinary happened, something that would challenge everything Elena thought she knew about bobcats and their social structures. The team had begun the process of weaning, introducing small amounts of ground meat alongside the formula. As expected, this new food source created competition among the kittens. In most predator species, this would be every kit for themselves. with the strongest getting the lion's share and the weakest often left hungry. Helena was observing this feeding through the video monitor set up in the enclosure, taking notes on her laptop, when she witnessed something that made her stop mid-sentence. Humphreys, the largest and most dominant kitten, had claimed a prime position at the feeding dish, his small body positioned to block his siblings. Typical behavior for a carnivore kit. But what happened next was anything but typical. After eating his fill, Humphreys stepped back from the dish and made a distinct chirping sound, a vocalization Elena had never documented in Bobcat kittens before. Then, more remarkably, he seemed to nudge his smallest brother Doyle toward the food. "Mike," Elena called, not taking her eyes off the screen. "Are you seeing this?" Mike hurried over, coffee in hand. "What am I looking at?" "The cooperative behavior," Elena said, pointing to the screen. "Humphreys is actively making space for Doyle to eat. I've never seen anything like this in Bobcat siblings before." Mike leaned closer, his eyes widening as he watched Humphreys not only yield his dominant position, but actually guide his smaller brother to the food. "That's unusual." "Unusual? It's unprecedented," Elena said, excitement building in her voice. "Bobcats are solitary predators. Even siblings typically compete aggressively for resources. This level of cooperation isn't documented in the literature." Over the next few days, they observed similar behaviors repeatedly. It wasn't just Humphreys. All three of the larger kittens seemed to have formed a protective coalition around Doyle. When Fremont discovered a new toy, a feather attached to a string that Elena had introduced for enrichment, she made a specific vocalization until Doyle came to investigate. Agassi would often sleep with his body curled around his smaller brother, providing extra warmth. "It's almost as if they recognize his vulnerability and are compensating for it," Elena mused during a team meeting as they reviewed the footage, which raises fascinating questions about Bobcat cognition and social intelligence. Thomas, the graduate student who had been analyzing the vocalizations, added his observations. "The specific chirps they use with Doyle are distinct from their other communications. I've isolated the sound pattern, and it's consistently used only in contexts where they're attending to Doyle's needs. Could it be that we've simply never had the opportunity to observe this before?" Mike suggested. "Wild bobcat litters are notoriously difficult to monitor from birth, and orphaned litters in rehabilitation typically don't have the same careful documentation we're doing here." Elena nodded thoughtfully. "That's possible. We might be witnessing natural behaviors that have gone unrecorded because of the limitations of field observation, or..." She hesitated. "Perhaps there's something unique about this particular litter." The implications were significant. If Bobcat siblings naturally demonstrated this level of cooperation and apparent altruism toward weaker members of their litter, it would challenge existing understanding of their social dynamics. If, on the other hand, this behavior was unique to Luna's kittens, it raised questions about genetic or environmental factors that might influence such unusual social development. As the kittens reached 6 weeks of age, another remarkable development occurred. Elena had begun the delicate process of introducing them to solid food, small pieces of rabbit meat, their natural prey. This transition was crucial for their eventual return to the wild, where they would need to hunt and consume whole prey. During one feeding session, Elena placed the meat pieces in their enclosure and stepped back to observe through the one-way glass that had been installed for this purpose. Minimizing human contact was becoming increasingly important as the kittens grew. They needed to retain their natural wariness of humans to survive in the wild. What happened next added another layer to the mystery of their unusual social bonds. Humphreys, who had mastered eating solid food most quickly, picked up a piece of meat in his mouth. Instead of consuming it, however, he carried it to Doyle, dropping it directly in front of his smaller brother, who had been struggling with the new food texture. "Are you recording this?" Elena whispered to Jessie, who stood beside her. "Every second," Jessie confirmed, her voice equally hushed. "Elena, this is food sharing in carnivore kits." The behavior continued over subsequent feedings. All three of the larger kittens would occasionally bring food to Doyle, seemingly ensuring he received adequate nutrition despite his smaller size and less developed coordination. Elena's documentation of these behaviors became increasingly meticulous. She set up additional cameras to capture every angle of the enclosure, analyzed blood samples to check for any unusual genetic markers, and began preparing a preliminary paper on her observations. "We need to be extremely cautious about anthropomorphizing," Dr. Rivera reminded her during a consultation about the kitten's health at 8 weeks. "What looks like altruism to us could have evolutionary explanations we haven't considered." "I understand," Elena assured him. "That's why we're gathering as much empirical data as possible. The vocalizations, the food sharing, the protective sleeping arrangements, these are quantifiable behaviors, not subjective interpretations." Marcus nodded, satisfied with her scientific approach, though his eyes twinkled with the same wonder Elena felt. "They're remarkable little creatures, aren't they? Speaking of which, how is Doyle's development progressing?" "He's still smaller than the others, but the gap is narrowing," Elena reported. "His motor skills have improved dramatically, and his hunting responses during play are right on target developmentally." As the kittens approached 3 months of age, they transformed from wobbling, fuzzy infants to sleek, coordinated predators in training. Their baby blue eyes had developed into the luminous gold typical of adult bobcats, and their spotted coats had thickened into the beautiful pelage that would help them blend into the dappled forest light. The team had expanded their enclosure significantly, creating an outdoor space that mimicked their natural habitat with rocks, logs, and native vegetation. Here, Elena introduced their first live prey, crickets and small mice, to trigger their hunting instincts. As expected, the kittens proved to be natural hunters, stalking and pouncing with increasing precision. But the unique social dynamics persisted. When Doyle initially struggled with capturing the faster mice, his siblings didn't simply compete and leave him hungry. Instead, they seemed to coordinate, with Fremont or Agassiz often driving prey toward their smaller brother, giving him the opportunity to make the kill. "It's like they're teaching him," Mike observed during one such hunting session, "like they understand he needs more practice." The team's observations had not gone unnoticed in the scientific community. Elena's preliminary reports had generated significant interest, and several prominent wildlife journals had requested more comprehensive articles. A documentary filmmaker had even reached out, interested in telling the story of these extraordinary kittens. But as the bobcats approached the age when preparation for release would normally begin, Elena faced a difficult question. Would their unusual social bonds help or hinder them in the wild? Traditional wisdom held that bobcat siblings naturally dispersed as they matured, each establishing its own territory and solitary hunting patterns. Would Luna's kittens be able to make this transition after showing such strong cooperative tendencies? And what would happen to Doyle without the support system of his siblings? "We might need to reconsider our release strategy," Elena admitted during a team meeting in the research station's small conference room. Maps of potential release sites were spread across the table, along with data on local bobcat populations and territory distributions. "What are you thinking?" Tomas asked, looking up from his notes. Elena traced a finger along the contour lines of a remote area in the national forest. "Rather than following the standard protocol of releasing them at different sites to prevent territory overlap, we might need to consider a phased release in a single larger territory, giving them the opportunity to stay together if that's what they choose to do." Mike looked concerned. "There's no precedent for that. Adult bobcats are territorial. Even siblings eventually compete for resources. There was no precedent for their cooperative behaviors either." Elena countered. We need to adapt our methods to what we're actually observing, not just what the textbooks tell us should happen. The discussion continued late into the evening, weighing the scientific implications against the kitten's welfare. By the time they adjourned, they had agreed to develop a modified release protocol that would allow for careful monitoring of the siblings' interactions in a semi-wild environment before making the final release decision. What none of them could have anticipated, however, was the challenge that awaited them the very next morning. A development that would put all their theories and plans to the test in ways they couldn't have imagined. Elena woke to the shrill sound of the security alarm. Disoriented, she fumbled for her phone. 3:17 a.m. The alarm connected to the kitten's enclosure had never triggered before. Heart-pounding, she pulled on boots and a jacket over her pajamas and raced outside, flashlight in hand. The night was cool and still, a half-moon casting silver light across the research station grounds. As she approached the enclosure, she heard an unmistakable sound that made her blood run cold, the deep, throaty growl of an adult bobcat. "Mike! Jesse!" she shouted toward the cabins, not taking her eyes off the enclosure ahead. "Emergency at the pen!" As she drew closer, the beam of her flashlight caught a flash of movement. A large adult male bobcat was circling the outside of the kitten's enclosure. Inside, all 4 kittens were huddled together on their highest platform, backs arched, fur standing on end. They were vocalizing in high-pitched distress calls that Elena had never heard from them before. The adult male was massive, easily twice the size of Luna, with battle-scarred ears and a powerful build that spoke of years of successful hunting and territorial defense. He was systematically testing the enclosure's perimeter, pushing against the fencing and making low, aggressive sounds. "He's trying to get to them," Mike said, appearing at Elena's side with a spotlight in hand. "Probably smells potential rivals in his territory." Elena knew he was right. Adult male bobcats were known to kill cubs, especially those not their own. An evolutionary strategy to bring females back into estrus and propagate their own genes instead. The kittens, at just over 3 months old, would be no match for this battle-hardened adult. "We need to drive him off without creating more stress for the kittens," Elena said, her mind racing through protocols for wildlife conflicts. Direct intervention could create negative associations for both the adult and the kittens, potentially compromising their future wild behaviors. Dr. Rivera arrived, pulling on a jacket as he hurried toward them. "What's the situation?" "Adult male showing predatory interest in the kittens," Elena reported quickly. "The enclosure is secure, but he's persistent." Marcus assessed the scene with experienced eyes. "The kitten's stress levels are concerning. If this continues, we risk psychological trauma that could affect their development." He turned to Mike. "Get the deterrent kit from my truck. We'll try sound first, then scent if needed." As Mike ran to retrieve the equipment, the adult bobcat became more aggressive, now actively clawing at one section of the enclosure. The mesh held firm. It had been designed to withstand far more than a bobcat's strength, but the psychological impact on the kittens was obvious. They were pressed together in a tight ball, Humphreys and Agassiz positioned protectively in front of Fremont and Doyle. "Look at their formation," Jessie whispered, having joined them with her camera. "They're defending each other." It was true. Rather than scattering to different hiding places, as would be typical for bobcat kittens, Luna's offspring had formed a coordinated defensive unit. Even in extreme stress, their unusual social bonds held firm. Mike returned with the deterrent kit, and Marcus quickly assembled a directional speaker that emitted specific frequencies known to discourage predators without being harmful. As the sound activated, the adult bobcat paused in his efforts, ears flattening against his head. He backed up several paces, shaking his head in discomfort. "It's working," Elena said hopefully. But her relief was short-lived. After the initial retreat, The male seemed to acclimatize to the sound, resuming his circling of the enclosure, though with more caution. "Let's try the scent deterrent," Marcus decided, removing a spray canister from the kit. This mimics the territorial marking of an even larger predator. No bobcat wants to tangle with a mountain lion. The scent spray, deployed at strategic points around the enclosure perimeter, had a more definitive effect. The adult bobcat made a low growl of alarm, backing away with more determination. He made several more circuits of the area, testing the air with flame in response, the distinctive open-mouthed breathing that allowed the scent to reach specialized olfactory organs. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, but was really about 20 minutes, the adult male slunk away into the darkness, disappearing into the forest beyond the station's perimeter. The team maintained their vigil for another hour, ensuring the intruder didn't return. Inside the enclosure, the kittens gradually relaxed their defensive posture but remained huddled together, occasionally making soft sounds to each other that Elena recognized as their specific Doyle vocalizations, though now they seemed to be using them more generally among the group. "Those are comfort sounds," Elena realized aloud. "They're reassuring each other." By dawn, the crisis had passed, but it left the research team with much to consider. The adult male's presence was a stark reminder of the real dangers the kittens would face upon release. The incident also provided valuable data on their stress responses and social behaviors under threat. "We need to review our release strategy again," Elena said, as the team gathered for an emergency meeting later that morning. Dark circles under their eyes testified to the night's disrupted sleep, but the adrenaline of scientific discovery kept them alert. Last night demonstrated both their vulnerability and their unique social adaptations. The adult male was almost certainly a resident bobcat from the surrounding forest, Mike noted, pointing to a map where they had tracked local bobcat territories. His reaction was natural, eliminating potential competition. In the wild, our kittens would face this threat regularly. But they faced it together, Jesse pointed out. Their cooperative defense behavior isn't documented in wild bobcats. It may actually give them a survival advantage. Elena nodded thoughtfully. "That's the question we need to answer now. Is their unusual social behavior maladaptive in the wild, or could it represent an alternative survival strategy?" Thomas, who had been analyzing the night's video footage, added another perspective. "There's something else to consider. The formation they took, with the stronger kittens shielding Doyle and Fremont, showed recognition of individual strengths and vulnerabilities. That suggests a level of social cognition we haven't previously attributed to bobcats." The implications were profound, not just for these 4 kittens, but potentially for understanding bobcat evolution and social structures. If a cooperative strategy could provide survival advantages in certain circumstances, it might explain occasional observations of adult bobcats tolerating each other in territorial overlaps, observations that had previously been dismissed as anomalies. "I think we need to adapt our research plan," Elena decided. "Instead of focusing exclusively on preparing them for traditional solitary release, we should design a study that allows us to observe whether their cooperative behaviors persist in a more challenging environment." The solution came in the form of a large natural enclosure, nearly 2 acres of fenced forest at the edge of the research station's property. Originally designed for studying deer behavior, it had been unused for several years. With modifications to make it secure for smaller, more agile predators, it could provide a semi-wild environment where the kittens could develop hunting skills while researchers observed their social dynamics. "It's not a perfect solution," Elena acknowledged as they toured the overgrown space later that day, "but it gives us middle ground between our current controlled setting and immediate full release." The work to adapt the enclosure began immediately. Specialized mesh was added to the top of the existing fencing to prevent climbing escapes. Remote cameras were installed at strategic locations throughout the space. Natural features like fallen logs, rock piles, and dense undergrowth were left intact or enhanced to provide the varied hunting and hiding opportunities the kittens would need. Most importantly, the size of the enclosure would allow the siblings to establish individual territories within the space if they chose to, or to maintain their unusual cooperative behaviors if those social bonds persisted. "We'll introduce live prey gradually," Elena explained during a video call with her university supervisors seeking approval for the modified research plan. "Starting with insects and small rodents, then progressing to rabbits and squirrels, natural prey they would encounter in the wild." The university committee, initially skeptical of the unorthodox approach, was won over by the preliminary data on the kittens' unique behaviors. The incident with the adult male had provided compelling evidence that standard protocols might not be appropriate for this particular case. This could be a significant contribution to understanding bobcat behavioral plasticity, the department chair acknowledged. "Proceed with the modified plan, but maintain rigorous documentation. If at any point the social behaviors appear to be detrimental to their development as effective predators, you may need to separate them after all." 3 weeks of intensive work transformed the old deer enclosure into what the team had begun calling bobcat territory. Native vegetation had been supplemented with additional plants that would attract natural prey. Small water features, a stream and 2 shallow pools, provided drinking sources and potential fishing opportunities as the kittens' skills developed. Most importantly, the space was large enough to present real challenges while still allowing for careful monitoring. The day of transfer arrived with mixed emotions for the research team. The kittens, now nearly 4 months old, had been the center of their professional and personal lives since that fateful day when Luna had been found dead. Moving them to the larger enclosure represented a significant step toward eventual release, a bittersweet milestone. "Remember, minimal human contact from this point forward," Elena reminded everyone as they prepared the transport crates. "They need to maintain their natural wariness of humans." The kittens had been trained to enter their individual carriers for feeding, making the transfer process less stressful. Still, they vocalized their displeasure at being confined, small growls and hisses emanating from the crates as they were carefully loaded onto the utility vehicle that would take them to their new home. At the enclosure entrance, a double-gated system to prevent escapes, the team made final preparations. Cameras were checked, recording devices activated, and the release protocol reviewed one last time. "We'll open all 4 carriers simultaneously," Elena instructed. "Then withdraw immediately to the observation blind. No sudden movements, no talking once the gates are open." With practiced efficiency, the 4 carriers were positioned inside the first gate. When everyone was clear, Mike operated the remote release mechanism that opened all 4 carrier doors at once. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, cautiously, Humphreys emerged first, his spotted coat catching the dappled sunlight as he surveyed this new territory. Agassi followed, then Fremont, each moving with the fluid grace that made bobcats such effective predators. Doyle, as usual, was the last to venture out. Though still smaller than his siblings, the runt had developed into a handsome young bobcat, his compact size balanced by exceptional agility. The team had discovered that what Doyle lacked in raw strength, he made up for in problem-solving abilities, often finding creative solutions to challenges that stumped his more physically imposing siblings. The 4 kittens regrouped just inside the enclosure, touching noses and making soft vocalizations to each other before beginning a cautious exploration of their new environment. From the observation blind, the research team watched in silence, recording devices capturing every movement and interaction. "They're staying together," Jesse whispered, stating the obvious but voicing everyone's thoughts. The typical pattern for juvenile bobcats would be to spread out immediately, each establishing a separate core area within the available space. Instead, Luna's kittens moved as a coordinated unit, Humphreys and Agassiz taking the lead while Fremont and Doyle followed slightly behind, all maintaining visual contact with each other. Their exploration pattern was methodical, checking each rock outcropping, fallen log, and clump of vegetation in turn. When Humphreys discovered the first water feature, a small stream trickling over rocks, he made the distinctive chirping call they had previously associated with Doyle. All four siblings gathered at the water's edge, taking turns to drink and investigate the shallow pools where small fish had been introduced. "It's like they're mapping the territory together," Thomas observed quietly, "building a shared mental model of the space." The first day in the new enclosure provided fascinating data, but it was what happened on the third day that truly astonished the research team. Mike, monitoring the overnight camera feeds early that morning, called Elena in excitement. "You need to see this footage from camera 7, he said, his voice tense with scientific discovery. Around 2 a.m. Elena leaned over his shoulder, watching the night vision recording from a camera positioned near one of the artificial prey release points. The team had begun introducing live prey into the enclosure, starting with mice and voles, natural food sources that would help the kittens develop hunting skills. What the camera had captured was unexpected. All four siblings had positioned themselves around a fallen log where mice had been released earlier. Rather than competing for the prey, they appeared to be coordinating their movements, Humphreys and Fremont on one side, Agassiz and Doyle on the other. When a mouse attempted to flee the log, it would run directly into the waiting paws of one of the strategically positioned bobcats. "They're hunting cooperatively," Elena breathed, amazed at the clear evidence of strategic thinking. "This is pack hunting behavior in bobcats." Pack hunting was well documented in social predators like wolves and lions, but had never been observed in North American bobcats, which were strictly solitary hunters in all the scientific literature. Yet here was undeniable evidence of coordinated predatory behavior among siblings who should, by all conventional understanding, be growing more competitive with each other, not more cooperative. Could this be an adaptation to Doyle's smaller size? Mike suggested. Maybe they developed these behaviors to ensure he got enough food during their early development, and now the pattern is established. Elena considered this. Possibly, but it doesn't fully explain the level of coordination we're seeing. This isn't just accommodation for a weaker member. This is sophisticated cooperative strategy that benefits all of them. Over the next several weeks, the evidence of unconventional social behavior continued to mount. The siblings established a shared core territory in the center of the enclosure, with individual preferred resting spots, but a clear pattern of group activities. They hunted together, shared food without apparent hierarchy, and maintained the distinctive vocalizations that seemed to serve as a complex communication system unique to their group. Most remarkably, they developed specialized roles that leveraged each kitten's individual strengths. Humphreys, the largest and strongest, often took point during hunts, driving prey toward the others. Agassiz excelled at ambush positioning, seeming to anticipate escape routes with uncanny accuracy. Fremont demonstrated exceptional climbing abilities, providing aerial surveillance from tree branches, and Doyle, with his problem-solving intelligence, often figured out how to access prey in difficult locations, like extracting fish from the deeper pool or flushing rabbits from dense brush. "They're not just cooperating," Elena explained during a presentation to visiting researchers who had heard about the unusual bobcat siblings. "They're specializing in ways that create a more efficient hunting unit than any one of them could be individually." The implications were profound, challenging fundamental assumptions about bobcat evolution and social structures. If cooperation could provide survival advantages in certain circumstances, it might explain occasional historical observations of adult bobcats tolerating each other in territorial overlaps, observations that had previously been dismissed as anomalies. The question now is whether this behavior will persist as they mature, Elena continued. Traditional wisdom says that as they reach sexual maturity, hormonal changes will drive increasing territoriality and aggression, eventually forcing them to separate. But as the kittens approached 6 months of age, the point when wild bobcat siblings typically began to disperse, Luna's offspring showed no signs of growing intolerance for each other. If anything, their social bonds appeared to be strengthening, their cooperative behaviors becoming more refined and effective. The research station had become something of a scientific pilgrimage site, with wildlife biologists from across the country requesting permission to observe the unprecedented bobcat social group. Elena limited these visits carefully, prioritizing the kittens' development over academic curiosity, but the scholarly interest confirmed the significance of what they were documenting. "We need to start thinking about the next phase," she told her core team during their weekly meeting. "They're thriving in the controlled environment, but the true test will be how these behaviors translate to genuine wilderness conditions." The team had been developing a groundbreaking release plan, one that would allow the siblings to stay together if they chose, while giving them the option of traditional dispersal. It would involve a phased approach, using a remote wilderness area where they could be minimally monitored without human interference. What they couldn't have anticipated, however, was that nature would force their hand before those carefully laid plans could be implemented. The first warnings came at dawn, urgent alerts on everyone's phones signaling an approaching disaster. Arizona's summer monsoon season had brought unusually heavy rainfall to the mountains north of the research station, and now flash flood warnings were being issued for the entire region. Elena was already awake, reviewing overnight footage of the bobcats when the emergency notifications began. She immediately called an emergency meeting, gathering the team in the main research building as rain began to fall in heavy sheets outside. "The situation is serious," she explained, pointing to the weather radar displayed on the large monitor. "The Coconino County Emergency Management is predicting severe flooding along Canyon Creek, which runs right alongside our property." She zoomed in on the topographical map, including directly through the bobcat enclosure. Concerned glances were exchanged around the room. The enclosure had been designed with many considerations in mind: predator protection, escape prevention, natural enrichment. But major flood resilience hadn't been a primary concern in this historically dry region. "How much time do we have?" Mike asked, already mentally calculating evacuation procedures. 2 hours, maybe 3 before the main flood surge reaches us," Elena replied grimly. "Emergency services are focusing on evacuating the residential areas downstream. We're on our own for this." The implications were clear to everyone. The bobcat enclosure, sitting in a natural depression that normally provided shelter from wind and human disturbance, would be directly in the path of the floodwaters. The kittens, now nearly 7 months old, were no longer the vulnerable infants they had rescued, but they would still be at risk of drowning if trapped in the enclosure during a major flood. "We have 2 options," Elena continued, her voice steady despite the urgency of the situation. "We can attempt to recapture and relocate them temporarily, or we can open the enclosure and give them the chance to escape to higher ground on their own." Each option carried significant risks. Recapturing the now nearly wild bobcats would be difficult and stressful for both the animals and the team. There was no guarantee they could catch all 4 in the limited time available, and the process might separate the siblings during a crisis when their cooperative behaviors could be most beneficial. On the other hand, releasing them meant potentially losing track of the subjects of their groundbreaking research and exposing the young bobcats to the full range of wilderness dangers before they had completed their planned preparation for release. "They're not fully ready," Jesse argued, voicing the concern everyone felt. "We're still at least a month away from the phased release protocol we designed." "Nature doesn't always follow our timelines," Dr. Rivera countered gently. "The question is whether they're more likely to survive a controlled release now or an emergency evacuation attempt." Elena made the difficult decision. "We open the gates. These animals have shown remarkable adaptability and problem-solving skills. Their cooperative hunting and defensive behaviors may actually give them a better chance in the wild than typical solitary juveniles." She looked around the room, meeting each team member's eyes. "And if we try to capture them and fail, they could drown in that enclosure. I won't risk that." With the decision made, the team moved quickly to implement an emergency release protocol. Camera equipment was secured in waterproof containers where possible, or removed entirely from locations directly in the flood path. The double-gated entrance to the enclosure was modified to create an exit route that would allow the bobcats to leave but prevent their return, a one-way door to the wilderness beyond. Throughout these preparations, the research team observed the bobcats' reactions to the changing conditions. With the instinctive awareness of wild creatures, all 4 siblings seemed to sense the approaching danger. They had abandoned their usual resting spots for higher positions on the artificial rock formations at the enclosure's northern edge, the farthest point from the creek that would soon become a raging torrent. "They know something's coming," Tomas observed as he helped secure equipment. "Look at how they're positioning themselves." Indeed, the bobcats had taken up a formation that had become familiar to the researchers, Humphreys and Agassiz slightly forward, scanning their surroundings with alert attention, while Fremont and Doyle remained close behind, all 4 maintaining visual and vocal contact with each other. By mid-morning, the rain had intensified to a blinding downpour. Water was already beginning to pool in the lower sections of the enclosure, and the normally tranquil stream running through the property had swollen to twice its usual size, its waters turning from clear to a muddy brown as they gathered force and debris. "It's time," Elena shouted over the roar of the rain, water streaming from her rain gear as she made final adjustments to the exit gate. The flood surge could arrive sooner than predicted at this rate. With a mechanical clank, the modified gate swung open, creating a clear path from the enclosure to the forest beyond. Now it was up to the bobcats to discover this escape route and make use of it. From the relative safety of the observation blind, now hastily reinforced against the storm, the team watched and waited. For nearly an hour, nothing changed. The bobcats remained on their elevated position, occasionally shifting but showing no interest in exploring during such threatening weather conditions. "They're not moving," Mike said, concern evident in his voice. "The water's rising faster than we anticipated." Elena studied the scene through binoculars, noting how the pooling water had now connected into a continuous sheet across the lower third of the enclosure. "They're waiting for a break in the storm. It's normal predator behavior, avoiding unnecessary exposure." But they didn't have the luxury of waiting. The latest update from emergency services indicated that the main flood surge was now less than an hour away, moving faster than initially predicted as drainage systems throughout the region became overwhelmed. "We need to encourage them toward the exit," Elena decided. "Tomas, get the wildlife deterrent devices from the storage locker, the directional sound emitters. We'll set them up to create a sound corridor leading toward the open gate." Within minutes, Thomas returned with the equipment, and the team worked quickly to position the devices at strategic points. These specialized emitters, normally used to guide wildlife away from roadways or other hazards, produce sounds at frequencies that were uncomfortable but not harmful to animals, encouraging them to move in the desired direction. As the devices activated, the effect on the bobcats was immediate. All 4 shifted uneasily, their ears flattening against the unfamiliar sound. Humphreys was the first to move, descending from their rocky perch and cautiously beginning to navigate through the increasingly waterlogged enclosure. His siblings followed, maintaining their characteristic formation even under stress. "They're moving," Jessie whispered, hope evident in her voice, "and they're staying together." The team watched tensely as the 4 bobcats made their way across the enclosure, instinctively seeking higher ground as they moved, a path that would naturally lead them toward the open gate. When Humphreys finally discovered the exit, he paused, scenting the unfamiliar opening cautiously. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed he might turn away, seeking another route. Then Doyle, in an unexpected role reversal, moved forward to investigate. The smallest sibling examined the opening and was the first to step through, turning back with a soft vocalization that seemed to signal the others. One by one, the siblings followed, Fremont next, then Agassiz, and finally Humphreys. As the last bobcat cleared the gate, a spontaneous cheer erupted from the observation team, quickly hushed as they remembered the need to minimize human sounds. "They're out," Elena confirmed, emotion making her voice rough. Heading upslope toward the ridgeline, exactly the direction they should go to avoid the flooding. The team's relief was palpable but tempered by the knowledge that the bobcats now faced the ultimate test, genuine wilderness survival without the protections they had known since birth. The last glimpse they caught of the siblings was Humphrey's distinctive form pausing at the forest edge, looking back once before leading his family into the shelter of the dense pines. Less than 40 minutes later, the full force of the flash flood struck. Canyon Creek burst its banks with explosive force, sending a wall of water, mud, and debris through the lower portion of the research station property. The bobcat enclosure was inundated, the carefully constructed habitat transformed into a muddy lake in minutes. The storm's fury lasted through the night, transforming the landscape around the research station. By morning, the floodwaters had begun to recede, leaving behind a swath of mud, uprooted trees, and scattered debris. The bobcat enclosure was nearly unrecognizable, the carefully constructed habitat now a tangle of broken branches, silt, and pooling water. Elena surveyed the damage from the ridge above, her heart heavy with mingled worry and hope. The bobcats had escaped the immediate danger, but their premature entry into the wild brought countless new challenges. Had their unusual social bonds and cooperative behaviors prepared them for this test, or would those very differences make survival more difficult? "We need to find them," she said to Mike, who stood beside her gazing out at the devastated landscape. "Not to recapture, that window has closed, but to monitor. This is still a research project, even if the parameters have changed dramatically." The team quickly developed a modified tracking plan. Though the bobcats hadn't been fitted with radio collars, a deliberate choice to minimize human interference with their development, they each had a small microchip implanted for identification. These couldn't be tracked remotely, but would confirm identity if any of the siblings were spotted or photographed by the network of wildlife cameras throughout the region. "We'll set up additional camera traps along likely travel routes," Elena instructed as the team gathered in the partially flooded research building. "Focus on ridge lines, game trails, and water sources that weren't affected by the flooding. And we'll conduct field surveys daily, looking for tracks, scat, any evidence of their presence or hunting success." Despite the devastation to their research site, there was an undercurrent of scientific excitement among the team. They were now witnessing the ultimate test of their hypothesis. Would the bobcats' unusual social behaviors persist in genuine wilderness? And would those behaviors prove adaptive or detrimental to their survival? The first evidence came sooner than anyone expected. Just 2 days after the flood, a motion-activated camera placed along a game trail captured clear footage of all 4 siblings moving together through the forest at dusk. They were traveling in their familiar formation, Humphreys and Agassiz leading, Fremont and Doyle following closely. All appeared healthy, their coats slightly damp, but their movements strong and purposeful. "They're still together," Jesse noted with barely contained excitement as the team reviewed the footage. "Even with unlimited space to disperse, they're maintaining their social unit." Elena studied the video carefully, noting subtle details in their behavior. "Look at their condition. No visible injuries, good muscle tone. They appear to be successfully hunting already." She pointed to the slight distension of Humphrey's belly, indicating a recent meal. Over the next weeks, the research team gathered data through camera traps, field observations, and careful analysis of tracks and scat. The picture that emerged was fascinating. The Bobcat siblings had established a territory approximately 3 miles from the research station, centered around a rocky outcropping that provided both shelter and excellent vantage points for hunting. Most remarkably, they were maintaining their cooperative social structure. Camera footage captured multiple instances of coordinated hunting, the siblings working together to drive rabbits or squirrels toward waiting ambushers, just as they had in the enclosure. Scat analysis confirmed they were successfully taking down prey of increasing size, including a young mule deer fawn that would have been too large for any individual juvenile bobcat to handle alone. "They're not just surviving," Elena reported during a video conference with her university supervisors. "They appear to be thriving. Their cooperative hunting strategy is allowing them to secure larger prey with less energy expenditure than typical solitary bobcats of their age." "And there's still no evidence of territorial behavior toward each other?" Dr. Abernathy, the department chair, asked, his academic skepticism evident even through the video connection. "None," Elena confirmed. "They're maintaining a shared territory with apparent role specialization. Humphreys and Agassiz focus on boundary patrols and defense, while Fremont and Doyle appear more engaged in hunting smaller prey and resource location." The academic implications were significant enough, but the practical conservation applications were potentially even more important. If some bobcats could adopt cooperative strategies in certain circumstances, it might influence habitat protection decisions, population management approaches, and rehabilitation protocols throughout North America. But the true wilderness held challenges that the controlled environment of the enclosure never could, and the siblings faced their first major test 1 month after their release. It came in the form of a mature male cougar that moved through the area, following the same game trails the bobcats had been using. At nearly 5 times the size of even Humphreys, the largest of the siblings, this apex predator represented a lethal threat. In normal circumstances, juvenile bobcats would flee or hide, often separating in the process and relying on individual stealth to survive. The research team first became aware of the cougar's presence when one of their cameras captured it, marking territory near the bobcat's rocky outcropping. Anxiety spread through the team as they reviewed the footage. "This could be bad," Mike voiced what everyone was thinking. A male cougar would see them as both competitors and potential prey. Elena immediately organized intensified monitoring, adding additional cameras and scheduling careful field observations from concealed blinds. The data they gathered over the next 48 hours told a remarkable story. Rather than separating and hiding individually, the Bobcat siblings implemented what could only be described as a coordinated defense strategy. They abandoned their central shelter temporarily, but remained together, relocating to a series of smaller rock formations that offered multiple escape routes too narrow for the much larger cougar to follow. From these positions, they maintained visual contact with each other while setting up a rotation of lookouts, always keeping at least one pair of eyes on potential approach routes. Most remarkably, they employed vocal communications that the research team had never documented before, lower, more muted sounds that seemed designed to alert without broadcasting their location to the predator. These vocalizations appeared to coordinate movements between positions, allowing the group to shift locations without ever fully exposing any individual. "It's like watching a small military unit," Thomas observed as they reviewed the footage, complete with lookouts, signals, and tactical repositioning. For 3 days, the standoff continued. The cougar circled the periphery of the area, occasionally attempting to approach one of the Bobcat's positions, only to be thwarted by their coordinated vigilance and strategic use of terrain. Whenever the predator focused on one location, the other siblings would relocate to safer positions, always maintaining visual contact with each other. On the 4th day, the cameras captured the cougar moving away from the area, apparently deciding that the effort required to hunt these unusually coordinated bobcats exceeded the potential reward. Within hours, the siblings had returned to their primary rocky shelter, resuming their normal hunting and territorial patterns as if nothing had happened. "This is extraordinary," Elena told the assembled research team as they analyzed the complete sequence of events. They didn't just survive an encounter that would typically result in at least some casualties. They effectively deterred a predator many times their size through coordinated defense. The implications were profound. Traditional understanding of predator-prey dynamics in North American ecosystems rarely accounted for cooperative defense among typically solitary species. If some bobcats could develop these behaviors, it suggested a level of behavioral plasticity and social learning previously unrecognized in the species. As summer transitioned to fall, the research project evolved into a long-term field study. The controlled experimental conditions of the enclosure had been replaced by the unpredictable variables of genuine wilderness, but the data being gathered was, in many ways, even more valuable. This was no longer about observing behavior in a constructed environment. This was documenting actual survival strategies in the wild. As autumn painted the forests of northern Arizona in brilliant hues of gold and crimson, the bobcat siblings continued to defy conventional wisdom about their species. 3 months after their emergency release, they had not only survived but established a thriving presence in their chosen territory. The cameras strategically placed throughout their range captured increasingly sophisticated cooperative behaviors, hunting strategies that had evolved beyond what they had displayed in the enclosure, adapted now to the realities of true wilderness. Elena's research had gained international attention, with wildlife journals requesting papers and documentary teams lobbying for permission to film the groundbreaking study. She managed these outside interests carefully, always prioritizing the bobcat's natural development over human curiosity. The observation protocols remained strict. Remote monitoring only, no direct intervention unless absolute emergency, minimal human presence in their territory. "We're not just documenting unusual behavior anymore," Elena explained during a presentation to visiting conservation officials. "We're witnessing what might be an evolutionary inflection point, the circumstances under which a typically solitary species develops social strategies as an adaptive response." The officials were particularly interested in the conservation implications. If bobcats could demonstrate this behavioral plasticity, it suggested management approaches that protected family groups might yield better population outcomes than those focused solely on individual territorial needs. But nature never stops testing, and as the first snows dusted the higher elevations, the siblings faced their greatest challenge yet, surviving a northern Arizona winter. For juvenile bobcats, the first winter was typically the most dangerous period of their lives, when prey became scarcer and the margin for hunting failure narrowed dramatically. December through February is when we'll see if their cooperative strategy truly provides a survival advantage, Elena told her team during their weekly meeting. Historical data shows mortality rates of up to 60% for juvenile bobcats during their first winter. Those concerns deepened when an early winter storm struck in late November, dumping nearly 2 feet of snow across the region in just 3 days. The sudden shift from fall to deep winter conditions would force dramatic adaptations for all wildlife, testing the siblings' resilience and problem-solving abilities. The first post-storm camera checks revealed both challenges and remarkable adaptations. The bobcats had relocated from their usual rocky outcropping to a denser forest area with better protection from the elements. Their tracks in the snow told a fascinating story. Rather than separating to cover more hunting ground as solitary bobcats would typically do, they had developed a star pattern of trails, radiating out from a central sheltered location, but always returning to regroup. "Look at this scat analysis," Thomas reported, pointing to the data on his tablet. "They've shifted their diet significantly, focusing almost exclusively on snowshoe hares now. It's a perfect adaptation for the conditions." Elena nodded, impressed by their flexibility. Snowshoe hares were ideal winter prey, abundant even in snow, requiring less energy to catch than deer, and providing rich nutrition needed for the cold months. What made this shift remarkable was how quickly the siblings had specialized their hunting techniques for this specific prey. "The camera at Station 14 caught a complete sequence," Mike added, pulling up the footage. "You need to see this." The video showed a hunting strategy the team had never observed before. The 4 bobcats had positioned themselves around a dense thicket known to harbor snowshoe hares. Rather than the usual ambush approach, they were implementing what could only be described as a coordinated drive system. Fremont and Doyle circled to the far side of the thicket, creating subtle disturbances that encouraged the hares to move in the opposite direction, directly toward where Humphreys and Agassiz waited in concealed positions. "They've invented a box drive," Elena said with academic excitement. "That's a hunting technique usually only seen in canids like wolves or coyotes, not felids." The strategy proved remarkably effective. The camera captured 3 successful kills in a single hunting session, an extraordinary success rate for winter conditions. Most importantly, the siblings shared the prey, ensuring that each received adequate nutrition despite the harsh conditions. As December deepened into January, the team documented additional winter adaptations. The bobcats had created a network of shelter locations throughout their territory, small caves, hollow logs, and dense thickets that they had modified with additional branches and vegetation for better insulation. They rotated between these shelters, never using the same one for more than 2 consecutive nights, a security precaution that reduced their vulnerability to larger predators. Most remarkably, they had developed a behavior never before documented in wild bobcats: deliberate food caching. When they made larger kills, they would secure portions of the prey in snowbanks or covered pits, creating emergency food reserves that could sustain them during periods when hunting became impossible due to severe weather. "This is unprecedented," Dr. Rivera remarked during one of his consultation visits. Food caching is known in mountain lions and some other felids, but not typically in bobcats, and certainly not in this coordinated fashion. The winter solstice brought another severe storm system, this one accompanied by temperatures dropping to -15 degrees Fahrenheit. For 3 days, the winds howled across the landscape, creating whiteout conditions that made any movement dangerous for both wildlife and humans. The research team could only wait anxiously, unable to check cameras or conduct field observations until the storm passed. When they finally returned to the field, the evidence they found was both concerning and astonishing. 2 of their camera stations had been destroyed by the storm, limiting their observational data. The tracks and signs they could find suggested the siblings had weathered the storm in one of their most protected shelter locations, a small cave on the south-facing slope of a ridge, shielded from the worst of the winds. But what truly amazed the team was what they found inside and around this shelter. The bobcats had significantly enhanced the natural cave, dragging in additional branches to create a windbreak across the entrance. Inside, they discovered clear evidence that all 4 siblings had sheltered together in an arrangement that thermal imaging suggested would have significantly conserved body heat. They had huddled in a rotating pattern that allowed each to benefit from the shared warmth while taking turns on the more exposed outer positions. "They've created a microclimatic solution," Elena explained, reviewing the thermal data. "By sheltering together and rotating positions, they would have maintained core body temperatures at least 10 degrees higher than any one of them could have managed alone. This thermal advantage represented a significant survival edge during extreme cold, potentially the difference between life and death for juvenile bobcats facing their first winter. What had begun as social bonding among orphan siblings had evolved into sophisticated survival strategies that directly countered the harshest challenges of their environment." As January gave way to February, the research team documented the siblings' continued adaptation to winter conditions. Their hunting success remained remarkably high compared to historical data for solitary juveniles. The food caching behavior became more elaborate, with multiple storage locations spread throughout their territory, each concealed in ways that deterred scavengers like ravens and coyotes. "They're not just surviving winter," Elena noted during a field observation session. "They're mastering it." But the true test came in mid-February, when the team's cameras captured a new and potentially dangerous development: the appearance of another bobcat in the siblings' territory. This wasn't the aggressive male they had encountered previously, but a young female approximately the same age as Luna's kittens, likely dispersed from her own birth territory by winter hardship. In typical bobcat social structures, the arrival of an unfamiliar individual in an established territory would trigger immediate aggressive responses, territorial displays, chase behaviors, and potentially violent confrontations. The research team watched with bated breath as their cameras captured the first interactions between Luna's offspring and this newcomer. The young female, whom Elena had tentatively named Sierra, based on the distinctive ridge-like marking on her forehead, initially kept to the periphery of the siblings' territory. Trail cameras caught her cautiously investigating their scent markers, her body language displaying the wariness appropriate to a bobcat entering potentially hostile territory. "She's malnourished," Dr. Rivera noted as they reviewed the footage, pointing to the newcomer's visible ribs and depleted muscle mass. "Probably struggling to hunt successfully on her own in these conditions." The first direct encounter occurred 3 days after Sierra's initial appearance. A camera positioned near one of the siblings' food caches captured the moment when Fremont discovered the intruder, attempting to access their stored prey. The expected aggressive response, however, never materialized. Instead of immediately attacking or driving away the trespasser, Fremont displayed what the team could only describe as investigative behavior. She maintained distance, but made her presence known through soft vocalizations rather than threatening growls. Sierra responded with submissive postures, lowered head, ears slightly back, while backing away from the cache. "That's not standard territorial behavior," Elena said, reviewing the footage frame by frame. "It's almost as if Fremont is assessing her." What happened next astonished the research team. Fremont retreated briefly, then returned with Humphreys. Together they approached Sierra again, this time with Fremont making the specific vocalization they had previously associated with Doyle, the inclusion call, as the team had begun to label it. "She's using the social coordination call with an outsider," Tomas said incredulously. "I never expected this." Over the next 24 hours, the cameras documented a series of increasingly complex interactions. The siblings appeared to be evaluating Sierra through a series of controlled encounters, first Fremont and Humphreys, later Agassi, and finally Doyle. Each interaction involved specific vocalizations, careful scent marking rituals, and what seemed to be tests of the newcomer's behavior. Sierra's responses showed remarkable adaptation. Rather than fleeing or fighting, she seemed to be learning the siblings' communication patterns, gradually mirroring their unique vocalizations and responding appropriately to their social cues. It's like watching a foreign language immersion, Mike observed during their analysis session. She's picking up their communication system. By the fifth day, the cameras captured what Elena would later describe in her research papers as social integration behavior. Sierra was permitted to access one of the siblings' food caches under the watchful supervision of Humphreys and Fremont. Though still maintaining a respectful distance, she was now clearly being tolerated within their territory. A profound deviation from normal Bobcat behavior. They're expanding their social unit, Elena realized, the implications sending a thrill of scientific discovery through her. This isn't just siblings maintaining juvenile bonds, they're actively incorporating an unrelated individual into their social structure. The question that dominated the research team's discussions was simple but profound. Why? Why would these bobcats, even with their unusual social development, accept an outsider? What evolutionary advantage might this behavior provide? The answer began to emerge as they continued their observations. Sierra, though initially weakened by winter hardship, proved to be an exceptionally agile climber, even more skilled than Fremont, who had previously filled that role in the siblings' hunting strategy. Camera footage soon captured Sierra positioning herself in elevated locations during coordinated hunts, serving as both lookout and overhead ambusher. She's contributing a specialized skill to the group, Elena explained during a hastily organized video conference with her university colleagues. This appears to be a merit-based inclusion. They've accepted her because her presence enhances their collective success. The evidence supported this theory. In the weeks following Sierra's integration, the hunting success rate of the now 5-member Bobcat group increased by approximately 20%. Their coordinated strategies became more sophisticated, incorporating Sierra's climbing abilities to flush prey from elevated hiding places or to block escape routes that would have been inaccessible to the ground-based siblings. We're witnessing the formation of what can only be described as a small society, Elena told her captivated academic audience. Complete with role specialization, resource sharing, and now, the integration of non-related individuals based on merit and contribution. The implications extended far beyond these specific bobcats. If this behavior represented an adaptive strategy rather than an anomaly, it suggested that bobcats as a species possessed social capabilities that had gone unrecognized by wildlife science for generations. Under specific environmental pressures or opportunities, what had been considered a strictly solitary species might be capable of developing complex social structures more typically associated with canids or primates. As February gave way to March, the winter's grip on the landscape began to loosen. Patches of bare ground emerged from beneath the snow, and the first hints of spring brought increased activity from prey species emerging from winter dormancy. For most juvenile bobcats who had survived their first winter, this would be the time when dispersal instincts strengthened, when hormonal changes drove them to establish independent territories and begin the solitary phase of their lives. The research team watched closely for any signs of this natural dispersal behavior among Luna's offspring. Would the warming weather and increasing prey availability trigger the dissolution of their unusual social group? Would Sierra's presence create new tensions as mating instincts began to emerge? The answers came gradually as spring progressed. Rather than dispersing, the bobcat group maintained their shared territory, though they expanded its boundaries to encompass a larger area as food resources became more plentiful. Their core shelter areas remained communal, with regular rotations between several favored sites that offered different advantages: sun exposure, security, or proximity to hunting grounds. Most significantly, they continued to refine their cooperative strategies. What had begun as simple coordinated hunting had evolved into a sophisticated system of resource management, territorial defense, and even something the researchers could only describe as cultural transmission, the teaching of specific techniques and behaviors from the original siblings to Sierra. "Look at this sequence," Elena pointed out during one analysis session. The footage showed Humphreys demonstrating a particular hunting technique to Sierra, the same pouncing approach that Luna had been observed using before her death. He's not just cooperating with her, he's teaching her family-specific hunting methods. This observation triggered a new research question. Were these behaviors learned from Luna, preserved by her offspring, and now being transmitted to non-related individuals? If so, it suggested a form of cultural inheritance previously undocumented in North American wildcats. The academic response to Elena's ongoing research was both enthusiastic and skeptical. Some colleagues embraced the implications, seeing connections to emerging understandings of behavioral plasticity in other species. Others cautioned against overinterpretation, suggesting the behaviors might be specific to these particular individuals rather than representative of broader species capabilities. The only way to know for certain is to document whether these behaviors persist across generations, Elena acknowledged during a departmental debate. Do the offspring of these bobcats maintain these social structures, or do they revert to typical solitary patterns? That question, whether these remarkable social behaviors would persist across generations, seemed destined to remain theoretical until a new development changed everything. In late April, the research team's cameras captured clear evidence that both Fremont and Sierra were pregnant. The timing aligned with a brief visit from a mature male bobcat that had passed through their territory in February, a transient individual that the group had neither integrated nor aggressively driven away, but instead had tolerated for a short period before he continued his journey. "This is the definitive test," Elena told her team, barely containing her scientific excitement. "Will these pregnant females remain with the group? Will they raise their kittens communally? Will the cooperative behaviors be taught to the next generation?" Traditional bobcat behavior would dictate that pregnant females separate to establish individual denning sites, raising their kittens in isolation until the young dispersed at approximately 9 months of age. If Fremont and Sierra maintained their integration with the group through pregnancy and birth, it would represent yet another unprecedented adaptation of typical bobcat social structures. The research team expanded their camera coverage, particularly focusing on potential denning sites within the group's territory. They also implemented strict protocols to ensure absolutely no human disturbance during this critical period. Even their field observations were now conducted exclusively through remote technology. In mid-May, both females disappeared from regular camera sightings, a clear indication they had retreated to give birth. What astonished the researchers was that they had chosen the same denning site, a protected rocky overhang with multiple small caves and crevices, offering both security and the option of separate spaces while maintaining proximity. "Communal denning," Elena breathed as they reviewed the footage showing both pregnant females entering the same general site. "That's a behavior documented in lions and some other social cats, but never in bobcats." For nearly 2 weeks, the cameras captured only occasional glimpses of Humphreys, Agassiz, and Doyle, who maintained their regular hunting patterns, but now focused their activities closer to the denning site. More significantly, they were observed bringing prey directly to the den entrance, behavior typically associated with male lions provisioning a pride, but virtually unknown in male bobcats, who normally played no role in kitten rearing. Then came the moment the research team had been waiting for. A camera positioned with a clear view of the den entrance captured Fremont emerging into the sunlight, followed by 3 tiny kittens, their spotted coats still fuzzy with infant fur, their movements wobbly but determined. Minutes later, Sierra appeared with her own litter of 4, the 2 mothers settling side by side as their kittens explored the small protected area outside the den. 7 kittens between them, Dr. Rivera noted, studying the footage with professional interest. "All appear healthy from what we can see." But the truly remarkable moment came when Humphreys approached the den site, carrying a freshly caught rabbit. Without hesitation, he dropped this offering near the two mothers, then settled nearby in a protective posture, watching over the entire extended family group. Soon Agassi and Doyle joined him, creating a defensive perimeter around the vulnerable kittens while the mothers rested. "They're functioning as a pride," Elena said, the academic implications leaving her momentarily speechless. "There's no other term for it. They've independently evolved a social structure almost identical to lions, despite having no evolutionary history of such behavior in their species." The research station became a hive of activity as Elena's team documented every aspect of this unprecedented social development. Academic journals that had previously been skeptical now clamored for publications. Conservation organizations began reconsidering management approaches based on the emerging data. Most importantly, the kittens thrived under this communal care system, with 5 adults contributing to hunting, protection, and even babysitting. The cameras frequently captured Doyle watching over all 7 kittens while the mothers hunted. The survival prospects for this new generation were exceptional. By late summer, the kittens had grown into rambunctious juveniles, exploring their territory under the watchful eyes of the entire adult group. The research team observed something extraordinary: the systematic teaching of the specialized hunting techniques that had made the original group so successful. Humphreys and Agassi demonstrated coordinated drives for the attentive kittens. Fremont and Sierra took turns teaching climbing and ambush tactics. Even Doyle contributed, showing the youngsters his unique problem-solving approaches for accessing difficult prey. "This is cultural transmission," Elena explained during a special symposium organized by the university. "These aren't just instinctive behaviors, they're learned techniques being deliberately passed from one generation to the next. We're witnessing the birth of a distinctive Bobcat culture." The academic community that had initially greeted Elena's research with skepticism now embraced its profound implications. If bobcats could develop these complex social adaptations in response to specific circumstances, what other species might harbor similar untapped potential? How might conservation approaches evolve to protect not just individuals or habitat, but these rare and valuable behavioral adaptations? As the original siblings approached their second year, now fully mature adults by bobcat standards, they showed no signs of dispersing or dissolving their unusual social bond. Instead, the expanded group had refined their territory management, hunting strategies, and care systems for the next generation. What had begun as the desperate survival bond of orphaned siblings had evolved into something that could only be described as a sustainable social system. "We need to reconsider some fundamental assumptions about evolutionary pathways," Elena argued in her keynote address at the International Wildlife Behavior Conference. "The traditional view that social structures develop only through long, gradual evolutionary processes may be incomplete. What we're observing suggests that under certain conditions, social adaptations can emerge relatively rapidly from species not previously considered social." In the forest, oblivious to their scientific significance, Luna's legacy continued to thrive. The expanded family group, now 12 strong with the addition of the 7 kittens, moved through their territory with the confident grace of predators who had found a successful adaptation to their environment. Their cooperative hunting success rates remained nearly double those of typical solitary bobcats, their territorial defense virtually impenetrable due to their coordinated vigilance. On the anniversary of Luna's death and the rescue of her 4 tiny kittens, Elena made a personal pilgrimage to the original den site where it had all begun. The research station had been rebuilt after the flood, the bobcat enclosure repurposed as a rehabilitation facility for other wildlife. But this spot, where a mother's death had sparked a scientific journey none of them could have anticipated, remained untouched, a small plaque the only indication of its significance. As Elena stood in contemplative silence, a movement in the underbrush caught her attention. Instinctively, she froze, years of field experience allowing her to become nearly invisible through perfect stillness. From the shadow of a juniper emerged a sleek bobcat, Doyle recognizable by his still smaller size and the distinctive pattern of spots on his left flank. Though now a mature adult, he retained something of the thoughtful problem solver who had captured Elena's heart during those long nights of bottle feeding. For a moment, their eyes met across the clearing, wild amber meeting human brown in a connection that transcended the usual boundaries between observer and subject. Then, with deliberate calm, Doyle turned and melted back into the forest, off to rejoin his unusual family. Elena smiled, feeling the perfect symmetry of the moment. Luna's desperate maternal sacrifice had not been in vain. Her orphaned kittens had not just survived, they had pioneered a new way of being, a new possibility for their species. In adapting to their unique circumstances, they had revealed capabilities that expanded humanity's understanding of what was possible in the natural world. As she turned to leave, Elena glanced once more at the small bronze plaque with its simple inscription, Luna, Mother, Pioneer. In the scientific papers and textbooks that would follow, there would be technical terminology and academic analysis. But here, in the forest where it all began, these three words captured the essence of a legacy that had forever changed our understanding of what four tiny bobcat kittens could achieve together.